Hi, I'm Reed. This is Crowland Publishing. We're a narrative gaming channel, and today we're coming back to our DMing skills series. I'm going to talk about using magic as a world building technique. Obviously, this is mainly for D&D because that's what the kids love, but you can use this for any kind of super far future. Technology and sorcery have become one, and for horror games as well. But for now, magic as a technique and a resource to build worlds with. Let's get into it. Now, I can't imagine that I am the first person to come up with this analogy, but science fiction is what we hope and fear will happen, and fantasy is what we wish might have been. And to me, what makes fantasy is thaumaturgy, wizardry, sorcery, sortilege, is magic, all that stuff. Now, if you've read my novels and comics, hint hint, it's on Amazon, Christian Reed, D. Reed, you'll know that magic is my great intellectual obsession. It's fascinating. Throughout all human history, literally every culture developed this secret technique to know and use the secrets of the universe. I also like it in fiction, I also like reading about it, but I think that for D&D, for gaming, it is a really underutilized and incredible technique for actually world building original, unique, idiosyncratic domains. So the first decision that any GM has to make is what actually is magic in your game? Where does it come from? Is it a gift from the gods? Or was it stolen like Prometheus's fire? Is it a secret language that is just a part of the universal rules like gravity and light that only the wise know? Does it come from somewhere else? Was it a divine energy from the sky or from the earth like in the Fionnevar tapestry books? Is it an energy measurable and usable, somehow analogous to, say, electricity like in hard fantasy? Now in D&D we have divine and arcane magic, and historically that's actually how most cultures did view magic. If it was done to respect and work with the gods, it's called theurgy, and if it's somehow outside the moral law of the gods, if it's somehow for the individual glory of the magician, it's called goetia. Now already just thinking about that, you've made some decisions about your worlds. Now in RPGs, lots of different kinds of people have access to abilities many would consider unnatural. Is a monk using key powers, using the same basic energy as a sorcerer? Is the divine energy of the gods a different resource than the arcane energies of the wizards? Are these causes of friction between these two spellcasting philosophies? So already, we've already got a lot to think about. A few books that I've taken great inspiration from over my career is the Fionnevar Tapestry, which I mentioned before. Fantastic books by Guy Gavriel Kay, Celtic-themed fantasy. And that posits that all magic is the gift of the goddess, the Earth Mother kind of a figure. You must pay for it in blood. So every time you cast a spell, you've got to bleed, and there's also some very rare voluntary human sacrifice in the culture. The blood and the death renews magic. But then mages come along much, much later, and they find magic in the sky. And they don't have to worship the goddess. They don't have to worship any of the gods. And that magic is a non-renewable resource. It drains something from the universe every time a mage casts a spell, much like a defiler might in the Dark Sun setting. But mages use human bodies as batteries to get around that, but it doesn't matter. The clerics bloody hate mages. They think that they are cheating the gods. China Mavel's Perdido Street Station, Baslag books has magic in a very, very scientific kind of a theme. It's measured in units, it's taught in universities, it's controlled by the state, it's often used as a weapon of terror. For example, flesh crafting is something that is done to convicts. It's one of the great features of the books, and it can be quite disturbing. It's really, really interesting to see how, his mages are tinkerers, they're scientists, they're guys who need a lab space, and they're always trying to get bloody money for their researchers. Also, one of his books ends with a battle of elementalists versus golem engineers that is just next level. You'll love it. And in D&D, we've got a lot of different kinds of magic. So is psychic abilities a kind of magic? What's druid magic, for example? Is it simply the green magic of the forest gods? Is it a low sort of folk magic that's not really respected by hyper-intelligent mages and divine worshipping clerics? Is it a kind of magic that is generated by all living things? Does a monk use magic, or does a monk just use some sort of internal energy? And is that internal energy magic? What about a paladin? They don't have to worship the gods. Magic is really going to be a key part of what your campaign looks and feels like. Do you have a setting inspired by history, say Celtic Britain? Then you could use druids versus imperial Latin using mages and clerics of Jupiter. Maybe you have Celtic dark gods like Crom-Cruach, or maybe you've got the weird gods like Orcus who empower warlocks. Maybe you do want to do like a really, really hard fantasy, new, weird kind of a game where magic is really just basically like a scientific discipline, where alchemy is drug dealing and injected into your body. It's really going to influence how your players look and act and react to magic when you do this, when you take this time to really think out what magic looks and feels like in your game. The other thing that I really like to do is that I imagine every spell list, every spell school, every different player character class as an individual separate discipline. So that it's not just that wizards and sorcerers and warlocks are different, it's that evokers are quite different from diviners. Evokers might be the battle college of the Lord Paleon, an illusionist might be a part of the Chaos Lodge. Death clerics might be a member of the Still and Dry Academy. Warlocks already have some of this built in, but perhaps something like All Great Old Warlock as members of the Black Star Inversion. Hexblades serve the Order of the Bloodseekers. Diviners might be the Telemetrists of Ur, or the Inverse Pyramid. Maybe all Oathbreaker Paladins look like the Sith from Star Wars. Maybe all Forge Clerics belong to the Vulcan Ascendancy. Find something that really brings players closer to identifying with their character class in this state. So a Black Star Warlock must have sacrificed a sapient. Vulcan Ascendant War Mages must coat one of their hands in burning iron. A Bloodseeker must never lose a jewel. Now this is a bit of work, I understand, so try and dragoon players into doing it for you, but also take some time to think about what spells you get. So say that 2 different spell lists have, Cure Light Wounds. But you need to call them something different to really get that sense of specific flavor for the PC. So you need to skin and describe them very, very differently, even though their game effects are identical. If you belong to the Dove Order of Healers, it's very beautiful harp music plays. But if you belong to the Scorpion Lords of the Dismal Depths, Cure Light Wounds is you get your flesh stitched together while you scream. A fireball might be a ball of fire, it might be an explosion of plasma, it might be a sudden emergence of a dozen tentacles that manifest for a second, stinging, biting. It's a bit of hard work, like I said, pays off. I think it's a great technique. I use it all the time. In a Dungeon Punk campaign I ran, for example, the great enemy faction of the PCs weren't the Necromancers, typical bad guys. Necromancers were a sort of chief labour force of the city. They were Salt of the Earth Unionists. It was the Noetic Ascendancy, the Enchanters, the Mind Magicians, who were the manipulative bastards, and they sucked. And then, of course, how common is magic? Traditional wisdom is that the more common that it is, the higher the fantasy. But you should also just think about how powerful socially and politically is it. How much effect does it have on people's lives? In the Gentleman Bastards book, for example, one mage comes to a town of warring thieves' guilds and corrupt nobles. One mage brings it all to a standstill. In the Thomas Covenant books, the lords, who are half mage, half priest, are all that stands between the pacifist peoples of the land and the forces of darkness, and the lords are quite revered. In Game of Thrones, magic's not even really believed in the beginning, but one cleric uses her magic to commit political assassinations that change the face of the world. People don't even believe that she's doing it for a bit. In the David Eddings books, The Elenium, magic is directly from the gods. And in the society, only the church knights can use it legally. But the church knights learn it off pagans, and the pagan peoples are quite hated by the very Christian society that the fantasy world is based on. So even knowing magic is quite a political football. Are you allowed to know it? Who controls access to the magic is therefore a very interesting question that you should ask in your campaign world. How do you become a magician? Is it controlled? I mean, private citizens who have the power to, change the weather and shoot lightning bolts in people's heads and all the rest of it, that's a big deal. Is it in fact legal at all for a private citizen to know magic? And if you do know it, do you walk away with the equivalent of a $100,000 debt? How does magic affect economics? If you need diamonds to cast Resurrect, a diamond mine has value far beyond just beautiful gems. If you need to go to a sacred wood to make a certain magical item, the people who protect that space have profound reasons to control who has access to the woods. They will fight settlement. They will fight any kind of intrusion. So what have we talked about? What's the origin of magic? What is magic? What's going on behind the scenes of all this magic? What does it look like culturally? How do the schools and the disciplines of magic look to the people within that culture? What does it mean socially? What does it mean economically? What does it mean politically to have this kind of enormous power in the hands of the citizens and in the hands of complicated organizations as well? If you take some time and really think about these questions and try to answer them, you will know a lot more about your world than when you started out. But perhaps more importantly is that the players with Magic using PCs will feel enormously connected not only to your world, but more importantly, they will feel, especially if you have let them have input into what their magical disciplines look like, to their own characters. This is a win-win situation. Take some time, think about it boldly. Why not give me a like? Why not give me a share? Why not give me a subscribe? Tell your friends, baby. I'm Reed. This is Crowland Publishing. That's been Magic. I love you. Goodbye.